ॐ सदाशिवसमारम्भाम्
आरम्भाम्
शङ्कराचार्यमध्यमाम्
शङ्कराचार्यमध्यमाम्
अस्मदाचार्यपर्यन्ताम्
अस्मदाचार्यपर्यन्ताम्
वन्दे
वन्दे गुरुपरम्पराम्।
गुरुपरम्पराम् ॐ
ॐ
सहनाववतु
सहनाववतु
सहनौ
सहनौ
भुनक्तु
भुनक्तु
सह वीर्यं करवावहै
वावहै
तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा
तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा
विद्विषावहै
विद्विषावहै।
ॐ
ॐ
शान्ति
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 शान्तिः.
शान्तिः।
Okay, so in the last class we had completed the mantra, and we had said that there was a fairly elaborate bhashyam by Shankaracharya on the word Satyasya Satya. So it's a very, very long bhashyam. So I'll not, you know, get into it word by word, sentence by sentence. Let's do a very, not too brief, but a summary of that bhashyam. So we have to look at that word which says Tasya Upanishad. In that mantra, the last line, there is a Tasya Upanishad, Satyasya Satya. Okay. So this word Upanishad here is not the text that we are studying. It's not a Upanishad as the text. It's a special word. And Shankara says it is a Abhidhayaka Shabdaha. Abhidhayaka Shabdaha means referring to something. And then you can see Tasya Upanishad. So Tasya is what? Tasya is a pronoun referring to something. And wherever there is a pronoun, there is always a noun. Right? So the question is, what is the noun that this pronoun Tasya is referring to? Now, what is the noun which you can see? The noun is called Satyasya Satya. Right? Now, here, if you have been following the arguments, you would see that Upanishad, I mean the text, the mantra, uses the word Atma but does not specify is it Jivatma or is it Paramatma. And therefore, that is the doubt. This Atma referring toward Jivatma or Paramatma, and depending on which is the classification that you accept, the word Satyasya Satyam will have different connotations. Right? It's an argument which you need to follow closely. If Atma refers to Paramatma, if the word Atma refers to Paramatma, then the word Satyasya Satyam is just a title, another name for Paramatma. But if Atma refers to Jivatma, then the word Satyasya Satyam is a nomenclature. It's a special name for Jivatma, right? So the enquiry is whether Satyasya Satyam is referring to Jivatma or Paramatma. That is the enquiry in this whole bhashya. Now this enquiry we can divide into three portions, three broad portions, so for easier understanding. And the beauty of these kind of bhashyams is that there are a lot, Shankaracharya introduces a lot of Purvapakshis, the opponents, they will object and then Shankaracharya will refute those objections and then finally the Siddhanti view, that is the Vedantic view will be given. What is the advantage? That we will come to know that there are some objections possible. We would never have been able to think of these objections. And Shankaracharya knows that. That is why he introduces these Purvapakshis. So let's come to the first Purvapakshi. The first Purvapakshi states that this particular mantra is talking about Jivatma alone. And therefore, Satyasya Satyam is a special nomenclature, a special name, which finally means Jivatma only. And there is no such thing as a Paramatma. This is the first Purvapakshi's statement. Then there is a second Purvapakshi. He disagrees and he says that in this mantra, it is not Jivatma at all, but it is Paramatma which is being discussed. And therefore, Satyasya Satyam is the title for Paramatma, but he adds, but that Paramatma is different from Jivatma. So we said we'll divide the inquiry into three portions. So these are the three portions. The first is the view that Jivatma is being referred to in this mantra. The second is the view that Paramatma is being referred in the mantra, but Paramatma is different from Jivatma. And the third will be Shankaracharya's conclusion. Right? And what is the conclusion? He says that, Shankara says that this mantra deals with Paramatma alone. And that Satyasya Satyam belongs to Paramatma. That's a title. It's a name for Paramatma. And then he differs from the second person and he says, but this Paramatma is not different from Jivatma. This is the three broad sections which we will take. Now let us take these ideas in detail. They are all very involved arguments, so you have to focus completely. Right? That is why everybody says that meditation is important because your mind comes into focus. Until your mind is focused, these kind of discussions don't give us any benefit. So the first Purvapakshi, he says that the whole Brahmanam, in fact, not the mantra itself, the whole Brahmanam discusses only Jivatma, and therefore Satyasya Satyam is a title belonging to Jivatma. It's only a name for Jivatma. And he says the Jagat Karanam, the creator of the universe, is Jivatma alone, and there is no such thing called Paramatma. Right? Paramatma doesn't exist. Only Jivatma exists. And that's for because Paramatma doesn't exist, the Brahmanam cannot be talking about Paramatma. Then he goes on to refer the earlier mantras. He says that when Gargya approached Ajatashatru and said, Brahma te pravami, I will teach you Brahman. Wait, that was the very beginning of the Brahmanam. What does it show? It shows that this particular Brahmanam deals only with Brahma Vidya. And then in the next 14 mantras, Gargyas was talking about what? About Brahman only, right? And then Ajatashatru pointed out that all the teachings of Gargya, they were about Saguna Brahman. And therefore, Ajatashatru offered to teach Nirguna Brahman. What is the conclusion? Saguna Brahman, Nirguna Brahman, the entire focus of this section of this Brahmanam is nothing but Brahma Vidya, nothing but Brahman alone. Right? Now, what happens after Ajatashatru says that I will teach you Brahman? Do you remember what happens? You kind of forgot it, right? Ajatashatru says that, you have taught me only Saguna Brahman, but I can teach you Nirguna Brahman. What happens after that?
So Gargya then says that he's ready to learn whatever.
And
Ajatashatru.
how does Ajatashatru begin to teach about the Brahman, Nirguna Brahman?
He takes him to a person who was sleeping.
Correct. So this is what happens next. After promising to teach Brahma Vidya, Ajatashatru takes Gargya towards a sleeping Jivatma. And then you know the story. He tries to wake him up and all that. And then he analyzes that Jivatma alone pervades the three states of Jagrat, Swapna, and Sushupti. And he points out that Jivatma alone experiences Jagrat and Swapna Avastha. Jivatma alone enjoys Punyam and Papam during Jagrat and Swapna Avastha. And in Sushupti Avastha, Jivatma withdraws. Right? This is what he has taught. And what is clear from here that Brahman is nothing but Jivatma. This is what the Purvapakshi is saying. It is clear that Brahman is nothing but Jivatma from that very story. Therefore, what is Brahma Vidya? The Purvapakshi says, when you say Brahma Vidya, you are talking about Jivatma Vidya alone. There is no Brahma Vidya separate from Jivatma Vidya. Right? And then he says the Jivatma is presented as Jagat Karanam also. Therefore, Brahman is that Jivatma which is the Jagat Karanam. Right? And what does perception show you? The Jivatma is Karta Bhokta Samsari. Therefore, he says that Brahman, which is Jivatma, is also Karta Bhokta Samsari. What is the proof that Brahman is Karta Bhokta Samsari? It is very evident in Jagrat and Swapnavastha also. Right? So, what is Brahma Vidya? He refines his answer. Brahma Vidya is nothing but Kartru, Bhoktru, Samsari, Jivatma Vidya. This Vidya, which talks about the knowledge, which talks about Jivatma, who is a Karta and Bhokta, that is called Brahma Vidya. Right? This is the uh, theory of the first Purvapakshi. And then he says, obviously, this Jivatma, that is Brahman, is also samsari, right? And in all the three avasthas, he is there because essential nature as the samsari will not change even when the avasthas change. So whether he is in Jagrata avastha or whether he is in Swapna avastha, he is samsari only. So Jivatma's essential nature is samsaritvam, kartrutvam, and bhoktrutvam. He is a samsari, he is a karta, and he is a bhokta in all the avasthas. Right? And to drive home this point, he gives a very nice example. He says whether a cow is sleeping or walking or standing or running or being milked, what is it? It is a cow alone. Similarly, this Jivatma, whatever he is doing, he is only a samsari. Therefore, this dreaming Jiva, the waking Jiva, the Sushupti Jiva, whatever he be, his final nature is what? Karta, Bhokta, Samsari. In Jagrata Avastha, he is an active samsari. In Swapna Avastha, slightly less active samsari. In Sushupti Avastha, he is still samsari, but he is passive samsari. And therefore, Brahman is the topic of this Brahmanam, and that Brahman is Jivatma, and that Jivatma is samsari in all the three avasthas. And therefore, when you say Brahma Vidya, it is actually Jivatma Vidya, right? And Brahman, the samsari Jiva, is the Jagat Karanam. And he supports it. He's saying that is the reason why in the previous sections the word Aham Brahma Asmi was used, right? Aham Brahma Asmi means that I am that Karta, Bhokta, Samsari Brahman. And therefore, what does the Upanishad reveal? Upanishad says, he says, every Mahavakyam reveals that I am this Karta, Bhokta, Samsari, Brahman. And don't talk about things like non-samsari, non-karta, non-bhokta. There is no such Paramatma at all. Right? This is the argument of the first Purvapakshi. Of course, since we occasionally think also, there might be a question, how can this miserable Jivatma, Karta, Bhokta, Samsari, who you are saying is the miserable Brahman Samsari, how can he be Jagat Karanam? Because we all know that this Jivatma, he cannot even cook rice properly. How can this, Alpagnya, Alpashaktiman, Karta Bhokta, Samsari Jiva be Jagat Karanam? That is not possible at all. That is a question which we can ask. If you are saying that Brahman is Jivatma only, and Jivatma is, miserable and doesn't know much and is not omniscient at all, is not omnipotent at all, how can that miserable Jivatma be samsari, be the what you call Karanam for the for the whole creation? How can he be Jagat Karanam? So he gives a very clever answer. He says, Shastram is the pramanam with regard to these things, and you should not question Shastram. Shastram says that Brahman is Jivatma, and Jivatma is Karta, Bhokta, Samsari. And Shastram itself says that Brahman, that miserable Jivatma, is the Jagat Karanam. So that you cannot question because you are a Vaidika. This is the argument of the first Purvapakshi. Okay, how do you like the argument? Anybody? Okay, fine. So then let us go to the second Purvapakshi. The second Purvapakshi comes and says, all these arguments of the first Purvapakshi, they are all absolutely ridiculous. Because there is something called Paramatma, and that Paramatma is not a samsari. And that not a samsari Paramatma alone is Brahman, and that Brahman alone, the non-samsari Paramatma Brahman, is what this entire Brahmanam is teaching. And he argues. He also has to argue, right? He can't just make a statement. So he says that this Brahmanam talks about Brahma Vidya alone. Why? You have to go back to the first section. Garya enters the king's court and says, I shall teach you Brahma Vidya. Right? From that very statement, what is it? Is teaching about Brahman only. And Brahman does not refer to any samsari jivatma, but it refers to the asamsari, non-samsari, paramatma, Brahman alone. Now a question can come. If Brahma Vidya is all about the Paramatma, why should Ajatashatru have gone to the sleeping Jivatma? What is the answer? When Ajatashatru was talking about Sushupti Avastha, you remember he uses an expression that this Jivatma is resting in the Paramatma, in the Hridaya Akasha, in the Paramatma. So when he doesn't wake up immediately, what is this? That is the argument, that is the reasoning that Ajatashatru gives. That he is not immediately hearing because he is resting in the Paramatma. Right? Now, the second Purvapakshi says that the fact that Ajatashatru said that this Jivatma is resting in the Paramatma means what? He is interested in somebody other than the Jivatma. And what is that? It is a substratum, the Paramatma, in which the Jivatma is resting during Sushupti Avastha. Basically, during Sushupti Avastha, Jivatma withdraws into Paramatma. That is what he is saying. And that Paramatma is asamsari and is the resting place of Jivatma. So this Purvapakshi says, Ajatashatru has introduced Jivatma. But Jivatma is not his primary focus at all. After introducing Jivatma, he introduces Paramatma as the resting place of Jivatma. And that Paramatma is not a samsari. And later on, when he uses the word Atma, that Atma should not be construed as referring to Jivatma, but Ajatashatru, he is referring to the asamsari Paramatma, which is the substratum where the Jivatma rests. So he says we are all samsaris during Jagat and Swapna, but during sleep we enter into Paramatma. And here he says that Paramatma, who is not a samsari, is different from me, the samsari. Right? I take rest in that Paramatma, and that Paramatma is not a samsari, and that asamsari Paramatma is Jagat Karanam. And therefore, the word Satyasya Satyam is another name, the title for that Paramatma. So So he says Brahma Vidya is about the non-samsari Paramatma. That is, and that Paramatma is different from Jivatma. Right? Okay. Then the question comes, how do you account for if you are saying that Jivatma is different from that Paramatma, Jivatma is samsari, Paramatma is asamsari. Paramatma is a resting place. That asamsari Paramatma, non-samsari Paramatma is the resting place for the samsari Jivatma. This is the argument used by the Purapakshi. Then the question is, if Paramatma and Jivatma are different, one is samsari, one is non-samsari, then what is the validity of the Mahavakyam which says Aham Brahma Asmi or Tattvamasi? Right. If you are saying that Paramatma is substratum, is a resting place only, but they are different from Jivatma, how do you account for all the Mahavakyams which talks about Jivatma, Paramatma, Aikyam, the oneness of Jivatma, Paramatma? When all the Mahavakyams talk only about that. That is a very definition of Mahavakyam. A sentence in the Veda which talks about Jivatma, Paramatma, Aikyam, identity of Jivatma and Paramatma. That is called a Mahavakyam. And if you accept the views of this Purapakshi, then the Mahavakyam has no meaning at all. So Purapakshi says, yes, Mahavakyam has no meaning at all. They are all casual statements. They are all Arthavadas. They should not be taken seriously. And therefore, you should never say that I am Paramatma. Always say I am Jivatma and there is a Paramatma who is the creator of the world. So I am the created and he is the creator. Therefore, what is my job? I have to do puja. I have to seek his grace regularly. I am dependent upon him. So you are a dasoham. These are the two views. Okay, one view is that there is no Paramatma. Second view is that there is a Paramatma, but he is different from Jivatma. The first view says Jivatma is Jagat Karanam. Second view says Paramatma is Jagat Karanam. Now Shankaracharya gives the answer. He says, take the basic statement, Anupravesha Vakyam. What is Anupravesha Vakyam? We have seen it in more than one Upanishad, so I hope you remember. Anybody? What is Anupravesha Vakyam? Because if you don't remember that, there is no question of going forward now. Tell me, somebody.
Brahman entering the creation after having created, but that was in Taittiriya. But here it is saying that it is to be understood as the consciousness which is in your mind, which is recognizable in your mind. Is that right? Yes, Acharya?
Is roughly, but I would prefer a better statement. Anybody?
Tattvamasi.
No, Tattvamasi is a Mahavakyam. I am saying, what does Anupravesha Vakyam mean? What is its basic idea conveyed? Taittiriya had it. Bradaranyaka has it. We have discussed in great detail. Huh. What is this Anupravesha? Anupravesha means Pravesh means entry. Right? Who enters what? So it says, the Vakyam says, all the Vakyams, they are different ones. They are basically defined as Anupravesha Vakyam. It says, Ishvara created the universe. right? What is the universe? Atma or Anatma?
Anatma, of course.
Anatma. Anatma. So Ishvara created mountains and planets and suns and galaxies and whatnot. And he created bodies also. Some of these bodies are not what they call inert. And why are they not inert? Because they have got consciousness. But when Ishvara creates the universe, it's fine. Everything inert is okay. Mountains are there, rivers are there. But when he creates a human being or even a tiger or a donkey or an insect, how does that insect acquire consciousness? How does the donkey acquire consciousness? How does the human being acquire consciousness?
With the presence of Sukshma Shariram.
With the presence of Sukshma Sharira, right? So, Anupravesha Vakyam says that after creating the bodies, the Ishvara enters the bodies. It is a figurative way of saying that the Sukshma Shariram is capable of reflecting the consciousness principle. Right? So Anupravesha means Ishvara creates inert and non-inert beings, and in the non-inert beings, which is initially inert, all bodies are inert, consciousness enters, right? Or consciousness is reflected. And therefore, the idea is that Ishvara is present there. Brahman is present there. Right? So by using this Anupravesha, the Shastram is saying that non-samsari Paramatma, he enters the bodies. Therefore, you can never say that the Paramatma is not there. Why Shankara using this? Because the first Purvapakshi said that there is no Paramatma. So he says no. The Upanishad, the Shastram talks about Srishti. And in the Anupravesha Vakyam, Shastram says that Ishvara, that Paramatma enters the Jiva Sharirams or the Upadhis. And therefore what? That Paramatma is now available as Jivatma only. Right? Because essence is what? Consciousness principle. Essence is Atma. Therefore, Ishvara is available in the form of Jivatma in the Vyavaharika universe. Therefore, the second Purvapakshi who says that Ishvara is different and Jivatma is different is wrong. Because it is nobody but that Ishvara who is available in the Jivatma's Upadhi. And that available in the Jivatma's Upadhi, that combination is being called Jivatma. Therefore, the second Purvapakshi is also not correct. Therefore, it is clear that Jivatma and Paramatma are one, and Paramatma is therefore non-different from Jivatma. Therefore, the Sarvagnya Paramatma, the all-knowing Paramatma, is non-different from the ignorant Jivatma. Right? So that all-knowing, omniscient Ishvara, every word is important. That omniscient Ishvara, Sarvagnya Paramatma, who is not different from the Alpagnya Jivatma, the Jivatma with minimum knowledge, is Jagat Karanam. Are you following? The omniscient Paramatma, who is not different from the ignorant Jivatma, is Jagat Karanam. That means, as Vedantins, we don't accept the fact that there is no Paramatma. So we reject the first Purvapakshi and we reject the second Purvapakshi also because he says that Paramatma is different from Jivatma. And we say no. That Sarvagnya Paramatma, who is the same as the Alpagnya Jivatma, that Paramatma alone is Jagat Karana. Okay, I want you to tell me that you understood. If you're not understood, you have to ask. You are very involved, Bhasham.
Perhaps this is the reason why uh, it is said that Har Kankar mein Shankar.
Yeah, there is no Kankar without Shankar,
हाँ,
right?
yeah,
Shankar is
yeah,
both the existence principle as well as the consciousness principle. If you look at Shankar as Maya, then the
yeah,
form of the stone is Shankar.
yeah. So only Sukshma Shariram actually differentiates between a human
Inert,
being and a
correct.
Kankar.
Between a
Yeah.
living being and non-living being.
Living being and non-living being.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Now we are not go over it. Okay, the inquiry continues. So that's why I'm saying be very, very focused on the inquiry because it's a very beautiful inquiry. Bhashya. Yes, somebody wanted to say something? Okay. Now the Bhashyam continues. So after saying, when Shankara points out that no, there is a aikyam between Jivatma, Paramatma, and that non-different Jivatma, Paramatma, that is the Jagat Karanam. Then another Purvapakshi enters. So this Purvapakshi is called a Bhedavadi. Who is a Bhedavadi? The one who accepts Bheda. What is Bheda? Difference. So Bhedavadi is one who accepts difference, which means he doesn't want to accept that there is Jivatma, Ishvara, Aikyam. Right? So he says this Aikyavada, Advaitik Vada, Advaitik idea that Paramatma and Jivatma are the same have got two problems. What is one? Pratyaksha, your daily anubhava, daily experience. It tells you that Jivatma is a samsari. That's number one, right? Your daily anubhava tells you that you, the Jivatma, are a samsari, subject to so many problems. And Shastram says that Paramatma is asamsari, not a samsari. Therefore, Jivatma's samsari status is proved by experience. Anubhava siddham. Paramatma's non-samsari status is proved by Shastra. Shastra siddham. Right? Jivatma's samsaritvam anubhava siddham. Paramatma's asamsaritvam Shastra siddham. And now you are equating both. If you equate both, there are two interpretations. And this objection we have seen in chapter 13 of the Bhagavad Gita, if you will remember. As I talk, you might recall. So he says there are two interpretations. When you say Jivatma and Paramatma are the same, if you accept the Anubhava Pramanam, which says that Jivatma is samsari, and you are equating Paramatma with Jivatma, what will happen? Paramatma is also samsari. Therefore, a samsari, Jivatma, is equal to the Paramatma. Therefore, Paramatma has to be samsari. This is the first defect. They are saying that if you are following Advaita, then you are saying that Ishvara is samsari, which is not acceptable. Okay, what is the other interpretation? When you say Jivatma is Paramatma, you take the other interpretation, Shastra Siddham. What is Shastra Siddham? Paramatma is not samsari. If Paramatma is not samsari and you say Jivatma is equal to Paramatma, then what happens? Jivatma becomes not samsari. If Jivatma is not samsari, why do you need Shastram? Why do you need Guru? Nothing is required. Because you don't need moksha. Do you remember? We had this argument in chapter 13. Anyway, I suggest you go and look it up because that is also same argument but with different ideas. Okay, now comes the third Purvapakshi. Now this third Purvapakshi is a special one. is called a Bheda Abhedavadi. So he says Jivatma is the product of Paramatma. Jivatma is Paramatma Karyam. Paramatma is Karanam, Jivatma is Karyam. And he says when you try to analyze any relationship between Karanam and Karyam, you will find you cannot say the relationship is either without difference or is with difference. Both statements are not possible. The relationship is always Bheda Abheda, is different as well as non-different. This is what? This is the Bheda Abheda Vadi, right? So he says, for example, you take the relationship between clay and pot. Normally, what do we say? Pot is the same as clay. There is identity. But he says, no, there is not. You cannot establish a total non-difference. Oh, sorry, a total difference. You cannot say pot and clay are totally different, which we understand. Why? Because without clay, there is no pot. And therefore, you cannot say that pot and clay are totally different. Two totally different things means they are not dependent on each other at all for existence. Therefore, if you say clay and pot are totally different, then you are saying that pot can be there without clay because they are different, right? So he says you cannot establish total Veda. You cannot say that pot and clay are totally different. Unlike, for example, a flower and let us say coffee, right? They have no dependence on each other, so they can exist separately, right? If pot and clay are totally different, you should be able to have the pot without the clay. But this is not possible. Therefore, you cannot say that clay and pot are completely Bhedaha, completely different. Then he comes to the second leg of his argument. Can you say they are totally identical? You cannot say. Why? Because you cannot use the pot in the same way that you use the clay. If you say that they are totally identical, then you should be able to replace the word clay with the pot. The clay should be doing the functions of the pot. But you find that clay cannot hold water, pot can hold water. Therefore, you cannot say that the clay and the pot are totally identical. So there is a Nama Bheda, difference in name. There is a Rupa Bheda, difference in form. There is a Karma Bheda, difference in functions. Therefore, how do you say that pot is the same as clay? There are differences. Okay. What is the best way to say? Best thing is that there is definitely difference, but there is some sort of identity also, some sort of sameness also. Therefore, he says, I call this Bheda Abhedavada. Not totally different and not totally identical. There is difference, but there is some sort of identity in the differences also. And he says, apply this to Jivatma, Paramatma. They are not totally different, nor are they totally identical. Names are different because forms are different. At the same time, they are not totally different because Jivatma cannot exist without Paramatma. You cannot say Jivatma is totally different from Paramatma. Okay, so this Bheda Abheda Vada, incidentally, it is, I think, from a great rishi called Bhartri Prapancha. So Bhartri Prapancha had propounded Bheda Abheda Vadaha. And remember that in Shankara's time, Vishishta Advaitam was not there. But this Bheda Abheda Vada, that is the source for Vishishta Advaitam. You can see the similarities. And that is why none of Shankara's Bhashyams, you will find that Vishishta Advaitam is criticized. Because why? Why does Shankara not criticize Vishishta Advaitam?
Like you said, it was not there, it was not available, so there was no question
Ramanuja,
of refuting it.
correct. Ramanujam came
Mm.
much later than Shankara.
Much later.
Right? Therefore, Shankara doesn't criticize, but Shankara engages with Bharata Prapancha always. Okay, this is the background. Now comes the refutation. Shankara splits Bheda Abhedavada into three possibilities. Right? So he says there is a first possibility. What is that? There can be many Paramatmas. Therefore, there is a species called Paramatma. Right? For example, Jivatma, there are many species. You agree? You have human beings, you have animals, you have insects, you have trees, you have plants, bacteria. So, Jivatma, there are many species. Similarly, he says, Paramatma also, there are many species. This is a hypothetical argument. Then you can say, if you do this, if you accept that there is a species called Paramatma, but there are many Paramatmas, then you can say that Jivatma is Paramatma. This is Abhedavada. But since there are many Paramatmas, therefore there is Bhedavada also. And therefore you can say that both Bheda and Abheda are there. It's like clay and pot. There's one lump of clay, but the products are pot, then there is a glass, then there is a plate, right? Or even if there are many pots, you can say pot is identical with clay because clay alone becomes the pot. This is the Abheda part of it, non-different part of it. But you can say that this pot is different because there are many lumps of clay. So one pot is different from one lump of clay, another pot is different from another lump of clay. All this you can say. And Shankara says this is not acceptable to us because Shastram doesn't talk about many Paramatmas. All the Shastra uniformly state there is only one Paramatma. Therefore, since Shastram doesn't accept, this particular theory cannot work. There cannot be multiple Paramatmas. There are multiple Jivatmas, but there cannot be multiple Paramatmas. So that is the first theory. There is another one. Second theory is what? There is only one Paramatma, but that Paramatma modifies, changes to become various Jivatmas. So it's like milk becoming curd. Curd is identical with milk because milk alone appears as curd, right? At the same time, curd is not totally the same as milk. So Nama Bheda is there, Karma Bheda is there, right? Therefore it is Bheda Abheda. But Shankara says this is not possible. Why? What is the reason? Why can we never accept? Why can a Vedanta never accept that Paramatma becomes Jivatma, changes into Jivatma?
Because he is our karta.
He is,
Because we know it's nirvikara.
yes, Nirvikara is a better
Nirvikara,
word. Nirvikara is a
yeah.
better word. Paramatma is free from change. Therefore, he can never modify it to become Jivatma. Therefore, Shankara says that also we cannot accept. Then there is a third theory which is very close to Vishishta Advaitam. This third theory is what? There is Paramatma, but the entire Paramatma does not change. One part of Paramatma becomes Jivatma, another part remains as Paramatma. Right? So this is called Eka Desha Vikaraha. Change in only one location of the Paramatma, one part of the Paramatma. So Jivatma is the same as Paramatma because one portion of Paramatma has become Jivatma, but the other portion is remaining as Paramatma. So that is the difference. So Bheda Abhedavada. Right? So you can say that you are samsari, that is also correct. You can say that you are a samsari, that is also correct. Right? So these people, they got a name. They are called Brahma Parinamavadi, who say that Brahman can change partially. And Vishishta Advaitins fall under this category of Brahma Parinamavadis. So Shankara says this is also not possible because Paramatma does not have parts, akhanda. There is no question of one part changing into Jivatma, another part changing into Paramatma. When Paramatma has no parts, where does that question itself come up? Right? Not only that, if Paramatma has parts, if you accept that Paramatma has parts, then there is a problem because whatever has parts will change, and whatever will change is not eternal. So, Savayavam, when you have Savayavam with parts, it becomes Savikaram. With change, it becomes Anityam, not permanent at all. Therefore, these three arguments are not logical and they are also against all Shruti Vakya. With this, Shankara says, I have dismissed all the three. But what happens? This Bheda Abheda Vadi, Purvapakshi, he comes again and says, no, no, you cannot reject the third possibility. Right? It is acceptable. Why? Because he gives the example of Prithvi. He says one part of Prithvi becomes desert. What is desert? It is Prithvi only. One part of Prithvi becomes a forest. What is forest? It is Prithvi only. At the same time, the desert is not identical with Prithvi because when you say desert, there can be no forest there. It cannot do the function of a forest. Nothing grows in the desert, so it is different from the forest. And the desert is the modified part of the earth. Forest is the another modified part of the earth. Therefore, Jivatma is a modified part of Paramatma. And he uses Shruti. He says Agni Visvalinga. We have seen that. Which Upanishad?
Mundaka.
What is Visvalinga? Sparks. Right? So he says Visvalinga is a product of fire, sparks. And fire is one, ekam. And sparks are many. And they are different from Agni. Sparks are not totally different. Both have got heat and light. At the same time, sparks are not totally the same because fire burns everything and spark cannot really burn anything. So it is a product of fire, but it is not the same as the totality of the fire. Similarly, Jivatma is a product of Paramatma, but he doesn't have the same influence or same sphere of operation as Paramatma. This is the Bheda Abhedavadi. Okay. So here Shankara gives a very, very, technical, if you want to call it, answer. He says whenever we use Shruti as an example, we have to be very careful because wrong analysis of Shruti can obstruct moksha itself. So he says, wherever Shruti is used, wherever Shruti gives an example and we are trying to analyze, that's a very important idea. Wherever you use an example of Shruti and you want to analyze the example, you should remember that using a laukika drishtanta, using a worldly example, Shruti is trying to teach you about alaukika vishaya, about non-worldly subjects. Right? Any Shruti example is It uses a worldly, example, very worldly object to try to teach you about non-worldly objects. That is the first thing you should remember. The second thing is that whenever a new idea arises from the example, that example should not contradict the worldly pramanams. Laukika pramanam, that example cannot contradict. Why? Because one pramanam cannot contradict other pramanam. Because then it would not be a pramanam. So if Shruti contradicts the worldly rules, then you should not use a worldly example because the example itself will lose the validity because of the contradiction. The second point. The third point is to teach about non-worldly objects, alaukika vishaya. Shruti has to necessarily use laukika drishtanta, worldly examples only. Why? Because non-worldly examples are not available in this world. As simple as that, for perception in this world. And for this reason, to teach a non-worldly subject, topic, if Shruti uses non-worldly pramanam, it is not possible to teach. Therefore, Shruti has to use worldly examples to reveal non-worldly topics. But there is a very important idea here, very important rule. It has to use the worldly example without contradicting other worldly pramanams. Laukika drishtanta can be used, but they shouldn't contradict Laukika pramanam. Using these three principles, Shruti has to reveal the alaukika vishaya, the non-worldly subjects. Are you with me?
Sir,
Yes,
Yes.
I'm
Don't.
sorry.
Yes.
I
Okay.
just missed the last one. I missed, Acharya. Laukika drishtanta can be used without refuting.
Without contradicting laukika
Uh,
pramanam. So
okay,
keeping
thank you.
these three examples, this Agni Vishwalinga topic has to be examined. So what is Shruti trying to talk about over there? Shruti tries to talk about Paramatma and Jivatma, right? Shruti is comparing Paramatma to fire, the Agni, and Jivatma to Vishwalinga, the sparks. And in this comparison, look at the three rules, the three principles we have talked about. Shruti is using Agni and sparks as an example. Both are visible in the universe. So Laukika Drishtanta it is using. Right? Fire can be seen, sparks can be seen. That is the first principle is taken care of. Then, what is Shruti teaching? It is teaching about Paramatma, which is Alaukika Vishaya. Second rule is also taken care of. You are using a Laukika Drishtanta to teach about a Alaukika Vishaya. You are using a worldly example to teach about a non-worldly subject. So first rule, first principle and second principle are taken care of. In the third principle, the Bheda Abheda Vadi makes a conclusion. He says, just as the spark is a part of fire, Jivatma is also a part of Paramatma. This is the logic of the Bheda Bhedavadi. He says, by using the sparks and Agni example, you have to make a conclusion that in the same manner, Jivatma is a part of Paramatma. And Shankara says, if you use this conclusion, then you are violating the third principle. What is the third principle? It should not contradict any worldly pramana. What is the conclusion derived by this Bhedavadi? With that is today's Vishishta Advaitin. Okay, if you want to connect it today, the Bhedavadi is called today's Vishishta Advaitin. The conclusion is that Jivatma is part of Paramatma. Right? So, Shankara says, if you use that conclusion, what is the problem? You will conclude that Paramatma has got various parts like Jivatma. Therefore, it will mean that Paramatma is a with parts, Savayava Vastu. It has got parts. Just as fire has got so many parts, which are the sparks. Paramatma will also have many parts, which are many jivas. And if Paramatma is taken as with parts, then Paramatma will be subject to vikara, change. Anything which is subject to vikara is subject to destruction, is not nityam. Therefore, you cannot say that Paramatma is Paramatma. Paramatma is Ishvara, you cannot say. This is what Shankara says. So, this Bheda comes back. No. He says, this Laukika rule cannot be applied for Paramatma. Why? He argues that Paramatma has got parts, but Paramatma is changeless and eternal. So if you say Paramatma is Savayavam with parts and Nitya eternal, it is illogical. It is contradicting what? Laukika Pramanam. What is Laukika Pramanam? Anything which has got parts will get destroyed. So the third conclusion, the third principle, which says that Laukika Pramanam should not be contradicted. Laukika Pramanam should not be contradicted, is being contradicted by saying that Paramatma has got parts, but is permanent, eternal. Because we know from experience that whatever has got parts will be subject to destruction. Okay. Now here, Vishishta Advaitin says that, okay, Jiva goes to Vaikuntha, he gets a special body there, and that special body is eternal. And he says that in Vaikuntha, the laws of the universe don't apply, and the body will be immortal, it will not perish. And Advaitin says what? We cannot accept. Why? Basic principle. Whatever is born must die. Therefore, Shastra Pramanam should not contradict Laukika Pramanam, which is what? Anumana Pramanam or Pratyaksh Pramanam. If it does, it cannot be taken as valid. Therefore, from this Agni Vishpalinga Drishtanta, the sparks fire example, the conclusion that Jivatma is part of Paramatma is not correct. The example cannot be extended to talk about the part-whole relationship. Then what is the example about is the question. If you are saying that you cannot use an example to talk about this part and whole relationships, that Jivatma is part, Paramatma is whole, if it should not be extended for that, what is the purpose of the example? Shankara adds that whenever you interpret an example, you have to interpret without violation of one logic and two, without violation of Pratyaksha Pramana. So what is the only interpretation? The fire is of the nature of heat and light. Spark is also in the nature of heat and light. Essential nature of fire and spark are one. That is the example is used for that, which you will remember from Mundaka. That the Drishtanta, the example is used to show the essential oneness of Jivatma and Paramatma. In fact, that they are the same nature. Jivatma is Chit and Paramatma is also Chit. Therefore, Jivatma Paramatma Aikyam is there. And all the Mahavakyams in Shruti also talk about Jivatma Paramatma Aikyam. Therefore, the example is meant for talking about the basic nature. not about talking about part and whole. And therefore Shankara says we cannot really say that Jivatma and Paramatma is there in reality. If at all you talk about differences, Bheda, it is a Bheda caused by the Upadhi, the superficial difference caused by Anatma. Okay, we have not finished. We'll stop here today. Any questions? Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnam Eva Vasishyate Om
Vashishyate.
Shanti
Om
Shanti
Shanti Shanti
Shanti
Shanti.
Om Tat Sat Om Namah
Om
Shivaya.
Om
Thank you
Tat
for your
Sat. Om
patience.
Namah
Om
Shivaya. Thank you, Ravi.